kind of coming out from behind the curtain to feel a little bit like, ah. Well, only a little. It's a great honor to be here, in part in this great company, but also because of this great, great museum, which I had never had the privilege of visiting before. And partly because I'm going to be training docents here tomorrow, I wanted to make sure I had at least some knowledge traits other than from the website of sort of what's on the walls. I just took a couple of hours and wandered and do it. Amazing, 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 beautiful, beautiful examples of an awful lot of really great art and artists. Empowering museum visitors, sort of catchy title, I presume. But it's been a sort of a concern of mine for a very, very long time, as Mike kind of indicated. When I came in, it wasn't because I was born in going to museums by any means, but I did stumble into them sort of beginning in college, and then happened to sort of just by happenstance find my way into working in the arts, and then concentrating in the visual arts, and then finding myself on the staff at the Metropolitan Museum at a point when people didn't have credentials to work in such things as museum education. And so it was, back then it was truly who you knew, who thought maybe you could do the job kind of thing, and we were inventing as we were going along. But because I kind of came from this background of sort of, you know, let's call it hard-scrabble learning about art, and I had done it on my own kind of thing, I was sensitive to the fact that not everybody sort of came into the museum with a full set of skills that made it possible or easy for them to sort of enjoy the full range of stuff that museums have. And you can become particularly aware of that at places like the Metropolitan, where there's this encyclopedic collection that has all sorts of different corners filled with different kinds of art, some of which could be empty much of the time. But even true at the Museum of Modern Art, where the more recent the art, the emptier the galleries. You sometimes wouldn't even really have to have a guard in galleries for days on end, because people were just rotating. Anyway, the whole notion of people needing help is something that most museums sort of have determined over time, through studies, through just common sense, through watching people, through projecting based on themselves. But the fact is that also visitor surveys have indicated that people really want help. And so museums have tried to comply with that. Given this expressed desire for help, and given some sense that it was important to try to supply it, museums have, beginning in the late 60s particularly, sort of developed lots of different strategies for trying to reach people. And sort of before the 60s, there were exceptions, but it was rare to have a very active museum education program. There were usually gallery lecturers who were dealing with revealing art history and tours through museums, and then occasional outreach to schools. But it was a very small public that came, and probably better equipped for the experience than happened to be, let's say, invited in by a lot of the gestures of the 1960s, sort of when there was a move on part of many institutions to sort of broaden their audiences and to sort of try to increase the audience to the point where it was more reflective of the demographics of the city, where cities where museums sat. They weren't very representative of the demographics, and you know what? They kind of still aren't. And it's sort of interesting that sort of museums have been investing for 50 years at this point in sort of education as a key to try to bring more people of more different economic and racial groups into the museum. And it's not a failure. Audiences are bigger, but they're still more or less so much the same people that it's somewhat distressing. If sort of we've been funded in museums by people who are looking for returns on their investments, they might think, what am I getting here? But fortunately they weren't. They were funded by foundations who relatively rarely ask that question. What's the problem? That's the kind of thing I want to really get at, sort of thing. But the focus of most of the teaching, beginning in the late 60s, when there were all these sort of different kinds of things created. It's like teacher workshops and more outreach to schools and community workshops and sort of more kinds of courses and more lectures and things. The strategies, the way people taught for the most part was however charmingly and however warmly and with however much enthusiasm, all of which was often the case, to speak about art, to tell people the sort of some history, some biography, some cultural context, and to some extent to let people, to try to give people strategies for looking, as in directed looking, sort of if you look over here at the left, you might notice, and so on and so forth. What was sort of interesting is that given the intention to sort of help people look on their own, it didn't work. And how do I know that? Because they kept asking for more. And year after year, they'd ask for more of the same kind of thing. But trustees at MoMA, when I was director of education there, where I was for a decade, were not content at all with our program evaluations, even though they were all superb. It was figured out, sort of in New York, you could hire anybody you wanted to take on these jobs kind of thing. We had an incredibly talented staff. Not only good at the art side of things and what they knew, but also great as presenters. But the fact is that when we did a very, very complicated and copious means of seeing if anything that we taught them stuck, we found out it didn't. We found out some stuff. It wasn't as if it was a complete wash. But what we were trying to do, which was to move them toward more self-sufficient viewing through a variety of strategies, through the sort of implanting in them of appropriate vocabulary, whether it was stylistic or technical or otherwise, and trying to get them ways of looking that they would use on their own. We didn't see it. It wasn't there. And the test was pretty fair. If we asked them to look at a work of art and simply to talk about where their eyes were going, anything that came to mind was appropriate. And what came out of those interviews, conducted by Abigail Housen and her research staff, was nothing that reflected what we had taught. So, what to do about that? But also, why was that so? Really, why did this well-intended teaching by very talented people with plenty of energy, plenty of insights, and lots of good evaluation studies following up, why did it not produce any change? Visual literacy. We conscientiously teach people to learn to read books from the time they're tiny children, particularly in parents in families with some affluence. But we also we turn it over to schools, but it's a huge emphasis to teaching people to read, kind of thing. But the visual piece is rarely taught, even to the point where people start reading books to children that are mostly illustrations, but more often than not, bypassing the illustrations and going straight to the text as if that was the most valuable reason for engaging children in books as they are very young. But in addition to the fact that it's not taught, people have very limited contact with art. And I put art as, in this sentence, as a truth. They do have very little contact with art. So there are a few intersections of art and people in our culture. But also because art is at the most complicated, deepest, difficult, most complex end of the visual spectrum. So there are other images that are as complex as visual art is, but in science and all kinds of scientific rendering and other aspects of trying to render information visually, they can be very complex and deep. It's sort of, but art exists at that spectrum, and that's not necessarily true of the plethora of images that people sort of see every day. Sort of, some of them are more complex than people think or act as if they are. In other words, they may be trying to sell them something. They may be trying to convince them of something, and people may or may not be aware of that. Although it'd be hard to come off of this election cycle and not realize that somebody's trying to tell you something with visuals, that there's a message underneath. But in fact, it does seem that sort of the process of looking at the images, isn't enough. And again, one of the reasons for that might be the speed with which these images go by us. And also the ubiquitousness of them, and also the intention of many of them. They're not asking you to think, they're asking you to go buy a cigarette or something like that, or vote for a candidate. They're not as teachers who you try to take to a workshop, who if you follow into the classroom, you can see whether they can do what you taught them to do, or docents. Docents who have been often the most extensive training that museums ever give, kind of thing. And it quite often is challenging when you follow them in the galleries to sort of see what it was they learned, and what it is they didn't learn, and what they make of what they learned. And it's not always a pretty picture. So it takes with some, but certainly not with all, this teaching that we do. But there's something else. Art is hugely diverse. And it comes, when you come into a museum, you can sort of find art from all sorts of different kinds of times, some of which the most expert people are not quite clear about what it means, as in this image on the upper, your left. It's assumed, it's given it's considered perhaps a fertility figure, whatever that means. But in any case, sort of, it didn't come with a label when it was found. It was somehow precious enough for its culture to sort of make sure that there were quite a few of them and that they were left in such ways that they could be found by future generations. But whereas it sort of, no doubt, meant a great deal within its culture. In other words, it was probably essential meaning within its culture, probably needed no label, didn't need any explanation, didn't require visual literacy for it to be decoded. When we confront it, we have to consider a great deal to try to figure out what it can tell us today. Sort of some art, like the art of ancient Egypt, has enough history, has enough different representations, is represented often in writing, hieroglyphics, that we eventually learned how to sort of decode, so that we can sort of know its purpose, kind of thing. And again, its integral role, at least in the lives of pharaohs, who were seen off to their greater good upon their death in these amazing ways. Thank goodness, some of which have made their way down to us now. Sort of for generations, maybe hundreds and hundreds of years, sort of in cultures like Africa, there have been tribal work, and this, of course, true across the globe. There is work that comes out of the traditions of a people, kind of thing, that has certain kinds of things that you can read and recognize, like this is probably a female figure. I could be pointing out to what I'm talking about. And a child. Oops. Oh dear, what did I do? The wrong button. I don't know if you can sort of see that the figure is clutching a child to her belly, kind of thing. So there are things that you can recognize, but exactly what it meant, why it looks as it does, why it's stylized in the way it is, why the legs, for example, are so short, why other features are sort of exaggerated. What the headdress means, what the expression on her face conveys, kind of thing. In more specific terms, sort of, we don't know, kind of thing. We can make out certain kinds of things, but not other kinds of things. And I think we are left with that sense of half-knowing, which is never terribly comfortable. Look, sort of, they're religious objects that are what we call religious objects, but sort of the arts have had a tremendous symbiotic relationship with religions for, as long as we know, kind of thing, because both, it could be architecture, it could be visual art, it could be music, it could be scripture, literature, but the fact is that sort of, the arts conveyed things that were sort of important in general to the people, and they were consensual kinds of things. It wasn't sort of as if an artist made up something, kind of thing, or sort of followed their own tune as we know today, kind of thing, but sort of followed within tradition, so they might have had a unique way of expressing it, but nevertheless it was a message that everybody sort of recognized. So the message to Christians embedded in this, and there's more than one, would be knowable. Ditto with this happens to be a Thai Buddha, but the notion of Buddhas, more or less that form, for hundreds and hundreds of years, sort of created over and over, so that, again, to solve to provide the representation of something that was sort of generic to the culture and known by all, and it sort of continues to be so if you're in the know in that case. So we have things that sort of have eclipsed us, our understanding because of time. There are things that we've sort of pieced together because of little bits of information. Do we know really what it's all about? Maybe, maybe not. There are other sorts of things that come to us where it's possible to find out the history and the content of it more directly, kind of thing. But the fact is that they were designed to speak to fairly homogeneous audiences. And when you come into the museum, you see all of them, and you may or may not know anything about any of them. And whereas you can piece things together, there's lots of stuff unsaid. But more recently, sort of the last few hundred years, there's been sort of other kinds of things that have happened in art. This is a very quixotic little journey through art, by the way. But this is a stand-in, as all those were stand-ins for bigger deals, bigger traits. There's a great deal of art that's made that's based on history or mythology or Bible stories or whatever, that tell a story of one thing or another kind of thing. And it's usually possible to sort of make out part of them if you look long enough and just sort of think about sort of the kinds of things that are going on or what meaning they might have. But it is also that you, again, have the notion in the back of your head that I might be missing something here, kind of thing, exactly who these people are, who's against whom, what is this? And if you follow the logic that many people do when looking at this and sort of see the headdresses on the soldiers, you might say, oh, they're Russian. They're not, they're French. And so it's sort of, there's this interesting possibility of sort of thinking you know and not knowing in truth kind of thing. But there's an awful lot of that. And when it's a mythological subject or when it's a biblical subject, sort of it can be, the meanings can be elusive for sure, even though there are many things you can recognize. Sort of the whole history of portraiture has lots of different sort of functions, from everything from aggrandizing kings and royal people to rich folks kind of thing, but it reached a kind of an apotheosis in a way, sort of in the work of Rembrandt. But in this late representation of himself, sort of as much of the information conveyed is emotional and underneath, beneath. You find it if you probe, if you look at it, you sort of see this little guy sitting there, and with a very ill-described thing in his hands, kind of thing, which eventually can be figured out. Oh, darn it. There's a palette and brush, but sort of, what's with this background? In any case, having the tools and knowing to take the time to try to figure out how to penetrate that. I'm laughing at myself because I just tried something tricky with these little animations to make things come up one at a time. But I'm not really learning how to do it. Anyway, so then we have the decorative arts, which are a whole other kind of thing that museums are full of kind of thing. And sort of, how do you look at that? What are you supposed to do with that? What do you appreciate from that? And then sort of, when it gets to be something like a Japanese tea ceremony bowl kind of thing, that's sort of not glamorous, not perfect, not made out of precious materials necessarily, not even all that regular kind of thing, sort of questions of sort of, craftsmanship come up, so that sort of not necessarily do you walk in having the capacity to sort of understand why this is art, what it's there for, and what you're supposed to get out of it. And you can bypass it pretty quickly as a result of that. And then, of course, we have the sort of, the heinous crimes of modern artists who created these things that sort of came out of their own craziness or intelligence or both, that defy sort of most of the strategies that you might just ordinarily apply if you are looking at any one of these other objects on that page, kind of thing. These things that were created in order to convey things that were abstract. And, no, this painting is not exactly deep. painted in 1948, and yet there are many, many people for whom My Pet Monkey could have done that kind of thing, is a more realistic response than, oh, I know how to do this, I know how to deal with this. So, with that, with arts being what they are, with the plethora of images coming on us daily, sort of, maybe to some extent even turning us off looking seriously, but so many of them constructed to be sort of quick takes. If you are working in the world where you want people to sort of take a deeper look, make more sense out of something, and enjoy it more, then you've got a job on your hands. But what does that job begin to look like? Sort of, what would be the outcomes that you might have if you were wanting to try to change things? In other words, to build visual literacy, the kind that might empower museum visitors in such a way that they wouldn't need a label, they wouldn't need help from a guide of some sort. So extended engagement, really knowing that you have, in order to get something out of something, that sort of spending time with it is important, and being willing to do that. And not just say looking at the label and then looking at the picture and then moving on. And what was kind of interesting today, sort of walking around for a couple of hours in the gallery, sort of, was to see the different styles at work kind of thing, but because there were people who were sort of just walking through, and I think they were looking at things, but it was awful quick. And nobody stayed looking as long as I did, kind of thing. And, I think, well, gee, better you should see 4 or 5 things during the time you have for your museum visit, and really look at them and really think about them, and sort of, and do that quick take kind of thing. Maybe it's necessary to do the quick take. I in part had to do that, of course, because there's much too much to see here in a couple of hours, but the fact is that sort of, the experience of experiencing art takes time, extended engagement. You have to be looking and thinking about what you're looking at, and you have to be willing to sort of look at not just those things that are familiar and comfortable to you, but to what stuff that's unfamiliar. And you want it to be of a wide variety of subjects, sources, materials, cultures, time. You want them, now this is really a complicated one, you want them to be comfortable with ambiguity, which means they're capable of sort of dealing with unsure, gray area, which is something Americans aren't all that great at, if you know what I mean. It's like, if it's not certain, you question it, kind of thing, like many people question climate change, because there's possibly some disagreement, or at least there is disagreement of exactly how much it's happening, when it's happening, what it's happening to, and so on and so forth, how it's showing up. But this business of being able to confront ambiguity, which is necessary for understanding pretty much anything in life. It's looking at health situations for various people who don't know exactly what's going to come of a particular treatment, or just because of a disease kind of thing. Sort of, it's more ambiguous than it is clear what the paths are, what the opportunities are. So comfort with ambiguity is necessary for sort of dealing with art, because when you look back at this stuff, how much of it is truly right or wrong answer related? A percentage, only a percentage. Sort of a great deal of it is open for interpretation, and perhaps many interpretations. Exactly what is going on with Rembrandt here? What is he thinking? Why does his face look so concerned? Is it concern? Is it sadness? Is it resignation? Is it, it's hard to know kind of thing. But that's what makes looking at this meaningful, is to be able to think about that kind of thing, and to wonder about each of those as possibilities. Does that make sense? But the business of being comfortable, you can learn to be comfortable with ambiguity if the subject is art and you look at it enough of that kind of thing. And yet it's one of those things that sort of makes it so that we can operate in our world in intelligent ways. You want people to have a variety of strategies for looking, because different images require different, in a way, skills kind of thing. It's not, These, looking at these things can't be done precisely the same way, partly because of their size, for example. The bowl's tiny. The Pollock on the right-hand side, lower right-hand side, is huge. And yet, it's more interesting if you happen to know that looking at the Pollock, both up close, to sort of see what you can figure out from examining the surface, and at a distance, and somewhere in between as well, to sort of try to glean what you can from the clues that the artist has given to you that might lead you to figuring out meaning, almost all of which is completely ambiguous. So, variety of strategies. Sort of, we want people to have curiosity to know more. Some works lead you to that naturally. In other words, that sort of picture by Goya that was in the upper left hand sort of might lead you to try and figure out, what war is this? Why are those people in such grave danger? What's the role of the church in that? Because there seems to be a friar of some sort there. Why are they unarmed, so many of them? Why are they lined up? What's the town in the background? So you really want people to get to the point where they are curious to know more, that they trust their eyes for making sense of what they can, that they're comfortable with the ambiguity of much of it, but that they want to know more and ideally know how to find out more. But from all of this, sort of, this is maybe cuckoo not here, me, Philip, but I want them to feel in the end that art is essential. And I don't believe just it's visual art, I believe the arts are essential. I believe that they're missing elements in most of our lives, and I believe that that's very, very dangerous for humans. Humans had all that stuff from the past that was giving meaning to their lives for millennia kind of thing, and how the heck do we think we can live without that stuff, feeding us the same way it fed them? How do we really believe that we are going to be fully human and fully humane without the stuff that art does for us, that pushes us beyond the day-to-day and the banal, that gives us that room for dealing with both facts and data and information, as well as things that can't so clearly figure outable, things that deal with both content and ideas and emotions and things like that. If we don't have that stuff, and we are not having working relationships with it that allow us to sort of feed on it, we're not being nourished in the ways that we need. And when you look around the world, you sort of, I think, see some evidence of the fact that people are not being nourished. So, for whom should visual literacy be inculcated? Everybody. It's everybody's birthright. It's not just rich folks. It's not just people of certain colors, certain social status. It's everybody. How can we get there? Well, here's my answer. It's called visual thinking strategy. And let's just do it. I'm going to ask you to, it's going to be a little bit hard for me to see you, but I will. I'll find you. I'm going to ask you to look at this for a minute. And then I'm going to ask you, what's going on in this picture? And that's not a rhetorical question.
A heated discussion.
And what did you see that made you say heated discussion?
Gesture and look on her face.
Okay, so the gesture meaning in her hands? And look at her face, so you think she's having a discussion with someone and it's animated. Okay, good. What more can you find?
She's in a public place.
And what did you see that made you say she's in a public place?
The group behind her.
Okay, good. So she's here, and then seems as if there's a what did you see that made you say public?
I guess the window behind, the way it's set up, it
Okay, good. So you don't think it's a domestic environment, but rather more a commercial environment. Evidence is the wet is oh, well, a little ambiguous, eh? All right, good. But it could be. But one of the things you first thought was sort of is maybe a commercial establishment with the windows of such and people congregate. Okay, good. What more can you find?
I know why, because the people that are in the background all have outdoor clothing. So it makes you think you're like a lobby of a hotel or a restaurant or something like that.
Very good.
She has outdoor clothing on too. Yeah.
And she also seems to maybe wearing something you'd expect to see on the street. But the fact is that sort of with the street clothes and present, sort of looks as if they're not in a domestic environment, but in some place where they've come in from the street and they're just not and are not either not or can't take off their outer garments. Okay, good. What more can you find? Yes.
She appears well.
What did you see that made you say that?
Her gloves, clothes, hat, the whole setting is affluent.
Very good. Judging from her clothes, her hat, her gloves, the setting, you think that she's wealthy. Good. What more can we find? Yes.
I think she's being rejected or detached from that. I think she looks sort of more like a painted woman because the other women figures are more conservative. So I might think that she might be, more like the lady in the lamp.
Say that again.
I think she has a look of a painted lady compared to what you see on the back of the lady in the background, which is very conservative, and she looks more the genre of the lady in the lamppost.
Oh, I see. Is that a Ohio euphemism? All right, good. You all know what the lady under the lamppost is. So. Okay, good. So you think she's a painted lady, maybe like a tart. So she think, and then the people behind her are not necessarily so. So sort of see her in wealthy, in rich clothing, but you're not so sure exactly what her profession might be. Okay, good. What more can we find over here? And then,
I see the difference in lighting. She seems to be an artificial light, and then in the background it looks like the light's just flooding into that room.
good. And what did you see that made you? What did you see that made you sort of think that she's in interior lighting?
I don't see the lighting on her as clearly as the people in the background.
Okay, good. So she's not lit as bright, in the same brightly lighted way that you can sort of see reflecting off of particularly this character. Okay, good. So that it may be natural light on the in the other part of the room, kind of thing. Okay, good. What more can we find?
Is it possible there is a mirror?
So is there a possibility of a mirror here? So there's a question. So that maybe she's looking into a mirror, and that these people are not actually in another space, but reflected in a space behind. Okay, good. What did you see that made you think that?
Because of the change in because it seems like too close to the wall, her feet, and there's a change in the wall. On the feet, her feet, see that part? She's too close to and then the light changes.
Okay, good. You've been sort of thinking about how close this wall is to her, kind of thing which seems kind of odd. And maybe this line here, kind of thing.
Right.
So that maybe this is, in fact, a mirror that's projecting sort of what's behind her. Okay, good. Mason?
Well, I was just going to say she feels, the space feels separated into two parts, and she feels separate from everything else.
Okay. Regardless of where they are vis-a-vis her, whether in front of her or behind her, kind of thing, she's separated off. And what did you see that made you say that?
Especially the black field.
Okay, that this black field sort of segregates her from whatever else is in the room. Okay, good. What more can you find? Yep.
The black shape, which could be a screen or anything else, makes me think that the conversation is meant to be private, which then makes me wonder who is she talking
sort of, the first comment sort of had her sort of an animated, maybe disagreement with somebody or something kind of thing, but you've taken this sort of to the, like, who, with whom? Whereas, so you were looking at this sort of thing, defining it perhaps as a folding screen kind of thing, and it was set up intentionally to give her an opportunity to have a private moment with someone else who we don't see. Okay, good. But more can be fine. Yes?
It seems like she's someone that just caught the artist's eye, someone that doesn't know that she's being observed and not interacting with the artist.
So, all right, let me make sure I understand this. So it's as if she's unaware that she's observed.
Correct.
Very good. What did you see that made you say that?
Just because it's like the back of her and she's not interacting with the artist, therefore the viewer.
Okay, good. So because she's got her back to us, kind of thing, therefore to the artist, kind of thing, it's as if she's in her own world, kind of thing, in a way that you were saying that she's sort of separated off from anybody else in the picture. Kind of thing. But also from looking at us. So we're not, let's say, in a one-on-one with her. Okay, good. What more? A couple more thoughts.
She's sitting in a comfortable chair.
All right, good. Easy chair. Great. What more? Yes?
It's as much about the pattern on the chair as it is about all the actions happening for me.
And what did you see that made you say that?
The roses are very distracting. There's a lot of attention paid to the flower pattern on that chair.
All right, good. So that the pattern on the upholstery on the chair seems so kind of in your face that it's sort of, it's almost as if it's the subject rather than anything else in the picture. And my goodness, why did she choose that outfit to sit in that chair? Never. Anyway, so the clash, stripes and flowers just really don't do it. Any final thoughts? Yes.
The light on the side of the chair reminds me of the Greek idea that the light came from our eyes out to the world. It's like it's from behind the artist painting it. Bright light on that lower part of the chair. And her glove, her left gloved hand.
All right, sort of thinking about the way that these stand out, kind of thing, how bright. Thinking in terms of sort of the notion of them having an internal.
Whatever the source of light, it just seems to come from this lower left and shining on that very lower part of the canvas.
Okay, so that the light might be coming in from here, kind of thing, but giving these things kind of a very vibrant light up there.
Brightest part of it.
It's the brightest part of the picture. So, in addition to sort of having these roses sort of stand out, kind of thing, that sort of these highly lit areas sort of punch. Okay, good. Any last thought? Yes.
She reminds me of the 1920s. To me, her outfit looks like it could be a heavy silk with a fur top. I think she's very creative. And she's quite possibly displeased about something.
Quite possibly.
Displeased. And it looks to me like she's got a feather in her hat. White. Reminds me of a feather coming off. But I think she's doing awesome. I think she's well dressed. I think she's wealthy.
All right, good. So more details about her dress, maybe even putting them in a time frame of the 20s kind of thing. But noticing there's a feather in her hat, and that she's wearing one, and that she has this big collar, and so on and so forth, sort of associating this with a particular time frame because of the details of the costume. Well, class, what did I ask you to do? What does this ask of you? Visual thinking? Well, that's a good one. Okay, good. When you say that, what do you mean? All right, so there's a visual exploration going on.
Observation.
Lots of observation.
And analysis.
What would you call the analytical parts?
What in the painting has made you think that?
Okay, so
That's somebody else.
So the question, what do you see that makes you say that, sort of requires the viewer to sort of make take an analytical stance and sort of define what it is they were seeing that gave that the impression that they got. What more?
Questioning the artist.
Very good. It allows you to sort of interrogate the artist and the intention and what's going on, kind of thing. Okay, good. What else?
Ties in with prior knowledge.
Very good. So it gives you the opportunity to apply prior knowledge. Did anybody hold back any knowledge they had? You're laughing. Good. Sort of when asked the question, what did you see that made you say that? Sort of it made you rely on strategies. Okay, good. They could come from different ways of knowing this thing, kind of thing. But what did make people laugh? What did they hold back? For example, what did you hold back?
You can tell by my face.
I'm finding that she's compacted. Her feet, the way she's sitting in this chair, the way I guess it's her knee is going up, the legs going down, and then that ledge, that step there. Who would put a chair right there? I mean, what is this? It's like she's so confined with that screen and not being a part of the other room. But on the other hand, maybe she's like going, what is this about?
So, okay, good. So,
There's lots of gesture, there's lots of emotion and feeling about that.
all right, good. So you held back, in fact, started saying something like, what? Why would anybody crammed in that little space? Why would she let herself be there? And is she maybe, is her gesture, maybe, is that a reaction to sort of being put in this preposterously small kind of corner? Like, here I am, dressed to the nines, pardon me? Very good. She was naughty. She was standing under a street corner, a light. And back in the day, instead of whatever they do to people who stand under streetlights now, they put her in the corner with her gloves on. All right, good. Well, so that's a strategy that we have used in many different contexts. Now, if in fact we next examined that, or that, or that, or that, what could happen? Think about that for a minute. We ask kids to examine pictures beginning with the likes of these, using that same strategy. What's going on in this picture? What did you see that makes you say that? What more can you find? I point to things. All the teachers who do BTS do this. Paraphrase what comments are. I link comments that relate to one another. I remain neutral. I don't say, oh, that's good or not. I sort of allow for diverse opinions kind of thing. But that's the strategy kind of thing. We do it with those pictures, and then we do it with some more pictures. And then we do it with others, and then we do it with others. And what happens over time? There's a developmental trajectory. It's very interesting. Babies, up till there's like 2 or 3, when language starts becoming such an important sort of thing, have incredible visual acuity. They look at everything for longer than anybody else finds interesting. And they do it for the purpose of trying to figure out what it is they're looking at. We don't know exactly what goes on in their mind, but we do know that they can focus their attention, and that we use that capacity they have to teach them language. So we've got a spoonful of sugar, or spinach, and sort of we're coming at it with them and sort of say, well, I'm going to give you another spoonful of spinach. Look, it's green, it's warm. Sort of that whole process of them noticing things and us naming them. That's a helicopter, that's an ant. Is how they develop language based on their observing and their listening and their other ways of sort of, at this point my 11-month-old granddaughter is eating everything. I'm trying to, at least. but their eyes are so incredibly important and incredibly useful to them. And if you think about it, sort of when you go to some place you've never been before, your eyes are the things that you use to help you get around if you don't understand the language. People who emigrate before they learn the language are dependent on what they see to figure out what's going on and to stay safe and to figure out how to dress and how to behave and so on and so forth. It's an incredible facility, sort of, but schooling, for the most part, doesn't use it. It so prejudices texts and numbers and so on and so forth that it stops using it. In fact, it's really quite shocking. The visual cortex of your brain is almost completely developed by the time, as much as it'll ever be, by the time you're 2. And then it stays about that size until you're maybe early teen, and then starts to diminish in size as people stop depending on their looking. But it can be reawakened, for example, just reawakened it in you. In any case, the data we have about BTS over time is very positive in terms of sort of developing skills in looking and thinking about meaning kind of thing. One thing that's sort of interesting, and I'm running out of time here, so this is going to be really, really quick, but Abigail Housen did a great deal of research on how people think when they look at works of art. And she looked at people who had no experience all the way up to people who were very, very expert. And she determined that there were a lot of different sort of strategies that were were used, and at different points, different ones were worked, different patterns were relied upon. In the same way that sort of crawling might work for a kid for a while, but then something makes them sort of decide they want to pull up on things and look around and try walking, and next thing you know, they're toddling kind of thing. It's not as if they couldn't crawl anymore, they just don't. They can walk now, so why would they bother, kind of thing. Well, the same thing happens cognitively, which as we develop through all sorts of different kinds of things, we abandon one set of strategies at some point which were very useful to us for a time period, but then are not. And Housen found out that to be the case. But her categories are very, very interesting for anyone who's interested in visual literacy, sort of. So because she parses observations to a very, very great degree. So there are 14 different categories of observations, from very, very simple to ones that add detail, to ones that start to see things in combinations, ones that try to put things in niches, and so on and so forth. So they're changing strategies for how a person observes as they develop more and more experience. The same with inferring meaning. If it starts with sort of random observations, sort of made, kind of idiosyncratically and interpreted almost entirely based on personal experience, like what you already know kind of thing. The first strategy that develops out of that is using observations to sort of build very short stories. I think she's happy, I think she's walking, I think the woman is gesticulating angrily. She's complaining about her placement in the room. Those kinds of sort of narratives sort of is another strategy. Another strategy at some point over people's viewing life might be sort of more metaphor, trying to look for metaphors. Another point, we're wondering exactly how it was painted, why it was painted, when it was painted, who painted it, and all of the kinds of things that sort of the art history behind it. Sort of various strategies that would be applied in meaning making. Another way of thinking that Abigail defined over 14 different categories of thinking domains was associations. Associations at first coming entirely from personal lives, but later from and memory. Then what personal lives begin to include is experience of new sorts over time. Sort of, and some of it will be with art, so that becomes part of the kind of associations that are made. Sort of evaluating goes from substance, very subjective, to sort of there's a lot of blue, I like blue, to objective. This is a very fine example of a Picasso painting. Wondering, from questioning, sort of thinking about, I don't know what this is about, to philosophical questions, sort of, what could this possibly mean in terms of the Islamic State? Or if we look at that painting, let's just, no, I'm not going to go to you. Never mind. Comparing, going from looks like to comparing within, sort of, so that over here it looks like this could be the background, but maybe if you look at it another way, it could be a mirror. kind of thing, sort of finding internal comparisons or external comparisons, sort of comparing this to other work by the same artist or other work that comes to mind, sort of that kind of comparing. Interpreting sort of has everybody does a certain amount of interpreting, but sort of there's a huge range of looking at meaning beyond the exact meaning of the fact that there's a woman there sitting in a chair, fancily dressed, and so on and so forth. Thinking about sort of, as we were beginning to do, kind of thinking about what this might mean in terms of her role in life and her, kind of her wealth. And so it's sort of, there's no money sign in there talking wealth, but there's sort of other indications sort of that kind of thing. So from BTS research, we have found that children develop more observations. I think more observations. They become more detailed, they see things in combinations, they infer more meanings from those observations. They base their inferences on evidence, and these become learned behaviors. Sort of, as I said, when we were studying our programs at MoMA to find out if anything stuck, nothing stuck. But these behaviors stick, and they begin sticking by the time kids have had 10 or so hours of this kind of looking. And they begin considering multiple inferences, multiple possibilities, sort of thing, holding a variety of different ideas in mind as plausible at one time, speculating among possibilities. Sort of, if you just think about sort of the Sunday news shows that have everybody at each other's throat all the time kind of thing, if people would just sort of say, well, that's a good point of view, but it's different from mine, but it's okay, what? Wouldn't life be different? But we don't do that very much kind of thing. They revise, they change their minds. Sort of there have been all kinds of accusations of various different sort of politicians flip-flopping because they change their minds over time and sort of, you know what? Smart people do that. When new information comes into play, yeah, you change your mind. Oh, I thought that, but I'm not so sure anymore. Elaborating, returning to sort of add detail. All of these are aspects of visual literacy kind of thing. And they're all key to getting people to the point where they can look at a whole range of visuals and pull meaning from them in a variety of different ways, knowing that they're going to get more out of it if they stick with it, knowing that they're going to get more out of it if they listen to someone else's opinion on something and don't just stick with their own. Gee, what a great idea. Isn't that kind of a good idea? What if some people who are, let's say, so focused on their own religion that they think another one isn't possibly okay too? And what kind of problem that causes in the world? What if people naturally had this instinct to think, you can be you and right in your regard, and I can be me and right in my regard, and it's okay? What if that was so for everybody? All right. Through exchanges, through the opportunity to sort of examine art, we exercise skills we may or may not have used, but they've been in place since infancy. When I ask people to examine works of art, they can all do it. If they have sight, they can do it. Any kind of sight. It can be peripheral. It can be all kinds of things. You can be impaired. But you can begin to use stuff that you use all the time in real life, but in another context. And you use what you recognize to help you puzzle through to what isn't so clear. But when you're doing it with art, it's not just about thinking, important as thinking is. But feelings are sort of merged into the process. So as we puzzle over information and ideas, we do that in the context of sort of finding feelings embedded in these things, kind of things. And I believe it's when these different kinds of, these two different modes, as it were, the finding of information and the finding, identifying, and allowing ourselves to sort of experience emotions meet, when they operate at the same time. That's when we feed not only our brains, but also our spirits. That's why the arts have had such a long relationship with religions. And it's what we so badly need now. We need to feed our spirits. We need to be visually literate, and we need the great art that museums like this possess as a part of getting there. Thank you very much. Mike, did you say that sort of
Yeah, so we have a little bit of time for some questions.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, it's our next keynote is in here. It's a relatively short turnaround, and I know that Philip would like to attend that. So if we don't get to everybody's question, he has agreed to meet after the last session in the galleries on the Classic Court immediately adjacent to the peristyle. So if you have more questions for Philip. But in the meantime, we do have a few minutes for questions. So if you would like to come up to the microphone where I am standing or immediately opposite.
And if I've answered all of your questions, that's okay.
Hi, I just have a question of how you end the experience. So we just went through it, you asked us a lot of questions, we analyzed, and then do you just move on to the next one?
What did I do?
Well, you told us what you were doing and why you did that experience.
That's not a bad way to end.
So is that, if we were going to go and implement this into our spaces.
So what did I just ask of you is not a bad idea for people who are sort of maybe getting a new experience, giving them a moment to reflect on it, sort of things. What does that ask of you? Because people are often in educational circumstances expecting to be spoon-fed stuff, not asked. So trying to help them understand that maybe they know more than they think they do. Maybe they can do more than they think they could. Maybe they can pull more meaning and pleasure out of something than they thought they could, kind of thing. And then that spoon-feeding thing just sort of, something okay. But sort of, it has a place, there's no question about it. And it often satisfies an itch, but it doesn't make you grow. How many lectures have all of us sat through? How many whole courses have we sat through? And we walk, it's like algebra. How well can you do it now? It's sort of, there's an issue really with that sort of business of not actually engaging in the work in a very concrete way, sort of getting people to think about this active process of learning, constructing meaning on your own, learning how to do it. And when it's a strategy that's a symbol, another thing you can do is sort of, well, what did I do as teacher and why? What were the purposes of sort of, so what were the questions I asked? So you remember that there is a strategy involved in this, and it involves 3 questions. So that's all. But it's a complete meaning-making cycle.
And do you ever feel like the teachers or people get frustrated because it's sort of like a cliffhanger where, yes, we described this lady, but what is the truth? Is she affluent? Was it a mirror? Things like that.
Yes, there is a period where that happens. But it's short. And what's sort of interesting is that when you do this with kids, 4th and 5th graders have figured out that there's a right answer to everything, and the teacher knows that when they ask you a question, they really want you to give you the right answer. If you don't, and so there's a bunch of kids who go like this all the time, and there are a lot of kids who do this all the time. And the right answer kids who have become to believe in right or wrong, as most of us do, and that there's a body of received information that we have to learn, that kind of thing, are frustrated. There's no question about it. And I think that, as I said, a full spectrum of knowledge leaves you with questions. It feels sort of a fully operating, visually literate mind has questions at the end of the day. That's great. And if they push you to go sort of find out more about it, all the better, kind of thing. So that's another way you can answer, is say, okay, what questions do we have? And how are we going to find the answers to those? And who's going to do it? And who's going to write it up? Kind of thing. But what I did say, actually, was nice job, class. And sort of my real role is to sort of compliment you on your good work, kind of thing. And these other things can happen. In other words, you can follow up in a variety of ways. But what happens quickly is people learn that it's a self-justifying activity. It doesn't need further elucidation. You don't have to have a right answer. Sometimes, since you don't, so much of the time, get used to it. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
So we probably have time for one more question for right now, but again, Philip said he would be more than happy to be available after the next session. So why don't we go over there for the last question?
Thanks so much. It was great to hear you speak, and just participated in my first visual thinking strategy exercise in London, in England, by someone who was trained through you. And it was very different to hearing you, and you're clearly much better practiced at it, I think, than she was. But what I wanted to ask...
It does take practice. It can look kind of simple, but it isn't quite as simple as it looks. It's a little bit like Zen.
It felt a bit forced when she was...
Well, it gets easier. It was when I started, too, I promise.
Yeah, I'm sure. What I wanted to ask a little bit more was about context, the context in which people are looking at works when they're going through visual thinking strategy. And because I think for me, that's a big issue. I've watched videos of visual VTS in action where there's a digital image projected. But for me, I do wonder about the how you found working in different contexts, working in a classroom with a digital projection like we did today, versus working in a gallery, and whether you find that elicits different kinds of comments. I imagine it would. And I guess that's my only criticism at the moment of VTS, is really about extracting a work from a context of, let's say, a gallery or a private home or wherever an artwork might have been made for or now exists in. So could you comment on that?
Well, I think we have to admit that museums take things out of context rather quickly and rather easily, and sort of, so that we experience an awful lot of stuff these days out of context. But if we didn't get a chance to experience it, even out of context, we might not experience it at all. Schools are set up to be ersatz experience. They're learning about stuff that they do. Ideally, if the better we teach, the more appropriate our curricula are, the more it does relate to real life outside of stuff. But the fact is that sort of most art historians have learned most of what they know about our history from bad slides. And the fact is that sort of that doesn't stop you from knowing. I mean, I developed a whole attitude about several wars, watching them on TV, not participating in them, kind of thing. We live a life where secondhand experience is sometimes desirable, but it's almost necessary for us to be informed in the ways we want. So I find it to be a different experience, and what's really great is that VTS in the schools is that they usually go to the museums as a part of it. If they can't, they sometimes go to galleries. If they can't, they sometimes find a local artist, because we have fairly good geographic distribution with VTS happening in schools, so there isn't always a museum accessible, but many people will go put kids on a bus trip and take them to that new context. And two things happen. One is the teacher often does the VTS teaching in the museum and feels really, really great about being able to teach in a new environment that was often off-putting to them before they had a strategy for doing it. And then the kids feel like, I own this place. It's sort of, and I think that it could conceivably change our audiences for tomorrow. Now, I don't believe it will until we change some few social barriers to making people feel uncomfortable going to museums on their own, which they do. So we have some work to do. Sort of this income inequality thing sort of is not a small matter, even when it comes to sort of who attends museums, who feels invited. Right. So I'm sure I'm taking too long now.
So we just actually have a quick related announcement.
Well, Philip, I just want to make sure you got to see Renika Dijkstra's I Saw a Woman Crying video at her retrospective at the Guggenheim. Did you catch that?
No, I didn't. I don't live in New York and I miss a lot.
Oh, you used to live in New York, didn't you?
I did.
Well, I want to recommend it to you and to everyone in the room and anyone that's ever studied the VTS, which, by the way, we use in our outreach program. All of our teachers have been trained in it and attended your training. It's a work by the photographer Renika Dijkstra. She's a Dutch artist, well known for her still portraits of young adolescents on the beach. I'm sure you've all seen them at some point. But she went on to make videos, and this is a rather long, for sitting through a video film of young British children about 4th and 5th grade. And when you enter the viewing room, you do not know what they're looking at. They are looking at the camera, and it's quiet, and they all start talking and describing what they see. And if you know VTS, you know that somebody asked them, what do you see? Now, they are not guided through the rest of the conversation. It's just them talking amongst themselves. And it's not until you you exit and you bother to read the label, that you discover they're looking at Picasso's Crying Woman. And it is a complete vindication of your approach and theory, which an artist has made a work of art out of. So anyway, the National Gallery acquired this video, and last time I saw it, it was installed in the, actually in the West Wing, in the lower galleries. So anyway, you should
Thank you.
try to catch
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.